Overcoming by Pure Voice Girl. Chapter 28. They managed to escape the ballroom without drawing too much attention, and the coach was brought around for them with Hannibal's mount tied behind, all but the coachman and a single footman sent home hours ago. Will was handed into the coach and settled on the soft upholstery with a huff of relief, but he looked back at the Colosseum with a fond smile, humming softly under his breath.
"You're near done in, aren't you?"
Hannibal asked, moving to sit across from him. He reached down and hefted Will's feet into his lap, steadying him as the coach shifted into motion.
"I have never felt so exhausted, but pleasantly so. What are you doing?"
Will queried when Hannibal slid his buckled shoes off. His only answer was to have the gentle, expert press of thumbs on the aching ball of one foot, and Will sighed heavily, unable to muster the affront to scold him.
"Nice?"
Hannibal asked, rubbing Will's supple foot in both hands, smiling when he spread his toes. He teased a finger into the hole in his stocking, saying,
"Well, holes this far, anyway." "I shall have to wheedle my husband to replace them,"
Will murmured, his tired smile unguarded and sweet, the street lamps revealing his expression in a flare of soft golden light.
"I have it on good authority that he is prepared to buy out the store,"
Hannibal said, working on his other foot as well, taking the occasional sidetrack down to his slender ankles, just because they were so temptingly near. Will chuckled, his head lolling against the seat, eyes slit nearly closed with exhaustion and enjoyment on his feet.
"Thank you, Hannibal,"
he said, the words slipping out of him almost on accident, an exhale of appreciation.
"For what?"
Hannibal asked, intent on his task but looking up to catch a glimpse of Will's face in the passing lights. He seemed sad again, reflective, and Hannibal paused in his work, just holding Will's ankles in his strong hands.
"Will?"
"For acknowledging I have a right to choose," Will whispered, gaze dropping just a little. "For not resenting me for it."
"I have no reason to resent you in anything,"
Hannibal said, resuming his gentle massage.
"Although I wonder what you will think come morning."
"What?" Will asked, coaxed from his tired thinking by the odd statement.
"Did you see Lord Rathmore?"
Hannibal asked, bypassing the question Will asked. Will shook his head, unseen in the darkness, and answered, "No, not once. But I did hear some unpleasant gossip about him."
"And us?"
"Us. I heard a group of women saying Lord Rathmore's drowning in... dead. They seemed to think I was my sister exchanging her actor for you."
"That's ridiculous. Your sister is nothing like you at all. Why must everyone see you in such an odd way? I had words with a friend of mine this evening on that very subject."
"Words?" Will asked, diverted momentarily from the subject of his sister by Hannibal's declaration. "What sort of words?"
"I was merely confirming that you are very small and delicate,"
Hannibal said, transferring both hands to one foot where he worked out his wounded affront on Will's aching instep.
"And he had the audacity to say that you were... not."
Will could not contain his amusement. It was evident in his voice when he asked, "Why, what did your friend say?"
"He said you were nearly as large as I am and could strangle a man with your thighs. Which I will not argue the point, as your thighs are superior to those of any other and no doubt could easily squeeze the breath out of some lucky person, but I took exception to his saying you were brawny. I believe he was attempting to needle me, the bounder."
"Brawny?" Will asked, barely able to repeat the word, he was struggling so hard not to laugh, his husband's ferocious vexation almost more than he could bear.
"Naturally I corrected him,"
Hannibal said, assuring Will as if he had any fears at all on that point.
"I informed him you are far too refined to strangle anyone with your thighs, and that you are small and fragile and wondrously brilliant and have no need to use your thighs for such things."
Will dissolved into throaty laughter and said, "I wish I'd been there to hear that, Hannibal."
"I was compelled to defend you against such obvious untruths,"
Hannibal said, the smile teasing his lips, proving he was striving to entertain.
"You are very small and very delicate, and nothing remotely like brawny."
"I can't imagine you thought me very delicate or small when I threw a crystal horse at you," Will ventured, recalling that moment and the tumble on the carpet that had followed. "And I very nearly got the better of you on that rug."
"You are resourceful and clever,"
Hannibal said, refusing to be put off his perception,
"which easily explains it. Then I suppose you could understand how people assumed I was my sister? Will inquired, grinning. Not in the least. How appalling! How could anyone imagine such a thing? That is what I thought, considering I am bigger than she is. Taller, perhaps,
Hannibal said, mouth pursing as he pictured them side by side, and honestly admitted that Will was the larger of the two, though not by much.
And I will own that you might be a shade more muscular, but that is only because you are a man of activity and spend your time outdoors in energetic action. You are my beautiful Adonis.
Will blushed at that, but was flattered by the compliment, and strangely pleased Hannibal was so inexplicably delighted by him.
Your years of vigorous work at Hartford have indeed filled you out quite nicely,
Hannibal said, insisting Will be told the truth.
I cannot imagine your sister could carry that costume with anything near your natural grace and dignity.
Well, apparently some could, and it seems Mina and I are identical to those who do not know us well, Will reminded him, chuckling at Hannibal's expression of pained disbelief revealed in a spill of light.
They thought she had cut off her hair and come this evening as your mistress. There are so many troubling things in that statement I hardly know where to begin. Though I might start with their opinion of my good taste. They think I would take your sister to my bed. Rest assured, everyone who is anyone knew I attended in the presence of my brilliant spouse.
Your brilliant spouse is apparently cold as a grave, Will informed him, prodding him with his toes when Hannibal stopped, frozen with shock. It seems reasonable that with a mate like Stone you would chase yourself up the sister's skirts.
Your sister, Hannibal said, resuming his massage, should return to her husband's side straight away. Rumors like that have the tendency to take hold when particular situations encourage them.
It pains me to think you're right, Will said, earning himself a chuckle from his husband.
Luckily it is a rare enough event not to cause you too much discomfort.
Will subsided against the couch seat with a soft sigh, Mina's situation intruding on his beautiful evening, insidious fingers of reality he wished he could ignore. We know the truth, at least, but I do wonder if some of what I heard was the kernel of truth.
Meaning?
I wonder if Timothy has found himself impoverished by Mina's tastes. He turned his cheek against the seat to look out at the passing city, still charmed by it despite the turn of his thoughts. That would explain my sister's unexpected desire to ensconce herself at Hartford House.
I will withhold my ungenerous thoughts on that count,
Hannibal said, falling still with his hands resting on Will's ankles, the soft play of his fingers idle and soothing.
I have never understood her sudden interest.
She was frightened you intended to murder me, Will said, swaying with the motion of the coach. She only wanted to keep me safe. So I thought. Perhaps it was something more desperate after all. Hannibal frowned, contemplating for a moment before he offered.
I will make discreet inquiries into the matter, Will. If your sister is in need, I will not refuse to help her.
Thank you, Hannibal, Will said, offering him a beauteous smile. That is very thoughtful of you.
She is your sister,
Hannibal said, resisting the urge to heave a sigh.
I will do my best to care for her as you would wish. I am curious what became of the ladies who dared to say such things to you, however.
What could I have possibly done to them? Will asked, hand curling over his heart as if shocked at the suggestion, small and delicate as I am. They were both laughing as the coach pulled up before Chelsea House. Hannibal slid his shoes back on him with a flourish that brought a grin to Will's mouth, before he helped Will extract himself from the coach, careful of his jacket. I feel like I could sleep for days, Will breathed, leaning into Hannibal's warmth as they moved into the townhouse, the footman scurrying ahead to light a lamp, which Hannibal took to see them upstairs.
Then I would assume you are too tired for another waltz?
Hannibal asked, and Will's soft laughter filled the landing when Hannibal scooped one arm around his waist, half waltzing him toward his room, humming a tune to mark time. My final waltz of the night, Will said, breathless as they came to a halt at the door. He watched Hannibal by lamplight, sleepy and smiling as the door was opened and he was escorted inside. Will moved to his bed and sat down with a yawn, hearing the low purr of his husband's voice when he gave instructions to the footman who had followed them up. Hannibal brought the lamp to Will's bedside table, a looming shadow in the darkness as he removed his gloves and tossed them down on Will's nightstand. It's so quiet, Will said, holding still when Hannibal reached for him, teasing loose the knots that Jimmy had tied and freeing Will of his mask.
If you can last a little longer, we could watch the sun come up,"
Hannibal suggested, setting Will's mask to one side. Will rubbed his eye, slapping the hand that started loosening his jacket.
"Mind yourself, Lord Clarges. 2 kisses do not a promise make." "I could always wake Jimmy,"
Hannibal said, kneeling between his spread knees to pull Will's shoes off and push them to one side.
"Hold still."
"I can undress myself," Will reminded him, shrugging the frothy, beautiful coat off when Hannibal had the last of it undone. The cool air reached him through the thin material of his blouse, and he sighed, distracted by how good it felt. Enough so that he didn't take immediate exception to his husband delving through the lace of his breeches to find his knee.
"You can,"
Hannibal agreed, long fingers moving to loosen the ties that held the leg of Will's breeches closed to reach his stocking. He pushed the layers of lace up and back, following the trail of his stocking up over the knee until the blue silk garter ribbon was bared.
"No, allow me,"
Hannibal said, finding the sight of Will's knee entirely diabolical in how benign it was pretending to be, when in fact it was a dangerous distraction of perfect shape and symmetry, covered in smooth, pale silk, and wrapped with a blue ribbon like a bow on a coveted gift.
"Shall I have it sent to its room with no supper?"
Will inquired, leaning back on his palms, his head cocked in inquiry. Hannibal looked up, hands cupped around Will's knee, thumb stroking him through the stocking.
"You are glaring at my garter, sir. Has it offended you?" "Only in that I do not see more of it,"
Hannibal told him, and diverted his attention once more to unknot and undo the ribbon.
"You are very dangerous, Will Graham. Even your knees are a menace to my stable thinking. I cannot imagine how little would get done in the world if knees such as this were on display."
His gentle touch belied his scolding, fingers lingering as he rolled the silky material down over Will's scandalous knee, down the muscular curve of his calf and off of his lax foot.
"Then I will not allow them to beleaguer you a second time,"
Will said, on a soft laugh, moving to untie his other cuff and pluck the garter free.
"No, you will allow them to beleaguer me all they like, thank you very much. It is my pleasure to pamper you."
"You think I need pampering?" Will asked, watching as Hannibal removed his other stocking, this time daring to kiss his exposed knee and tickle his fingers up the sole of Will's foot.
"I was not pampered or spoiled enough to satisfy you."
"Not by half," Hannibal said, tossing the little rolled stocking toward the wardrobe.
"If I were to be daily driven from rational thought by the sight of your garters, Will, then I would count myself a lucky man."
"I would never have thought to hear such a thing out of you, Hannibal Lecter," Will said, catching his wrist and pushing back his cuff. He made a show of winding the blue garter ribbon around Hannibal's wrist and tying it into a bold, tidy bow. "A favor, to carry you through your daily battle with the sight of my knees." His soft, pleased laughter drew an answering chuckle from Hannibal, who admired the ribbon and even nuzzled it, sighing to find Will's scent clinging to the silk.
"With such a favor I surely cannot lose. But now we reach the tricky part."
"What tricky part is that?" Will asked, a little breathless when his husband loomed into his space, still masked and impressive, his strong hand slipping around Will's slim waist to reach his back and pluck his blouse free from the top of his breeches.
"Freeing you from what is possibly the most titillating piece of clothing ever created to test one's discipline,"
Hannibal murmured, finding the lacing on the corset and loosening the knots. Will smirked and reached up, undoing the ties on Hannibal's raven stag mask to draw it free and set it aside. The sight of his husband's eyes ringed in black drew a soft "Oh!" from him, and he laughed a little, rubbing his thumb beneath one amber eye.
"Berger suggested it, so as to complete the illusion," he said.
Will's hand fell to Hannibal's jaw, thoughts heavy in his blue eyes.
"What are you thinking of?"
Hannibal breathed, freeing the boned material and pulling it out from beneath Will's thin blouse in a waft of his scent. It was hot and sweet and flooded Hannibal's mouth with hunger. Something else stirred in response to his mate's unique perfume, a bone-deep, instinctive response that had never found an appropriate outlet, never been weathered or provoked as nature intended. He could feel it there beneath the surface, slumberous, but waking more with every breath. It began to uncoil itself with more urgency when Will said, "I'm thinking of kissing you." Will took the corset from him and tossed it toward the wardrobe in a deft twist of his slender body. He turned back to Hannibal, hand still firm on his jaw, and said, "I caught you after all."
"You did?"
Hannibal said, reflexively wetting his lip in response to the suggestion, and marveling that Will did not sense this sudden awakening. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps by the flush on his cheeks and the hazy desire in his eyes, something was rising within him, too, a silent response to one another, pulling them further down the road of their blunted, stunted instincts.
"You caught me long before tonight, Will."
It brought a soft chuff of pleased laughter from his mate, and a smile, though he ducked his head, sudden nerves gripping him.
"If you are trying to flatter me, Lord Clarges,"
Will said, tipping a shy look at him from under his lashes, sly and alert in the golden lamplight.
"It's working." "Good, because I mean every word of it."
He trailed off when Will tipped his head up, claiming his mouth in a kiss that was demanding, encouraging, not in the least bit shy. He coiled against Hannibal, and it was Hannibal who shifted to offer more of his mouth, more of himself, open and willing. Will's other hand rose, and he gripped Hannibal's cheeks with both hands, pulling him close, his curiosity fueling him where inexperience betrayed him. The sheer, innocent, seeking quality of his kisses made them all the more delectable, and Hannibal settled in his grip, content to reap the rewards of Will's efforts and allow his mate to do as he pleased with him. He would always allow Will to do as he pleased with him, he knew, and the understanding made those kisses so much sweeter. A knock at the door parted them, breathless, flushed, and half embarrassed, but smiling. There would be more kisses, more moments like this, and both of them were determined to savor things as they unfolded. Hannibal pushed to his feet from where he was kneeling and answered the summons, blocking Will from view with his body. When he turned from the door he had a tray in hand, and nudged the panel closed with his booted foot.
"No dinner, sadly, but we are not entirely bereft of good food,"
Hannibal told him, settling the tray on Will's vanity. He noticed the lacquered jewelry box then, and paused. "Keep it hidden, little fawn. Never tell him you have it."
"Where did this come from?"
he asked, shock muting his voice. He sat the tray on the vanity and reached out as if he would touch the box before him, but stopped himself at the last second. Will got to his feet, peering around him to see what Hannibal was referring to. He saw the box and recalled the journal, still tucked away out of view. "It was in the closet," he said, the tray of fruit and cheese and cold water momentarily forgotten. "Did you not have it put there?"
"No, I had no idea it was here,"
Hannibal said, opening it carefully. He laughed, the sound soft and slight, and said,
"Empty. The maid's probably made off with anything of value. I was certain grandfather had everything of hers packed away."
He glanced over at Will, one eye catching the faint lamplight, the other in darkness, just watching as his husband fished something out from beneath his pillow.
"Do you know who this belongs to?"
Hannibal asked, the sense memory of jasmine perfume filling his nose. He could almost feel her there, cloudy-eyed and groggy, her hair hanging in a mussed mess around her shoulders. She vanished like fog in sunlight when Will drew near, the warmth of his scent driving away the faint traces of jasmine. "I do know who it belongs to," Will said, holding something out to him. "This was hidden beneath the lining. It was a little book, a journal. A familiar book at that." "Always scribbling away. Let me see it." Hannibal flipped it over without hesitation and leaned toward the lamplight, reading the only inscription written in English. "I am Murasaki. I am Murasaki. I am Murasaki and will always be."
"Lady Murasaki,"
he murmured, flipping the book closed in a smooth, firm motion. "Bedelia took me to the gallery at Fernhill," Will said, reaching out to cover Hannibal's hands in his, soothing his distress. "She told me some little of what had happened, who Murasaki was, who Misha was, how your father and grandfather fought, how you lost them." Hannibal said nothing, his thoughts still caught in the tangled web of a childhood that had always been a closed door to him in so many ways. "I intended to tell you come morning. I was not keeping it from you."
"No, I know that,"
Hannibal said, drawn from his thoughts by Will's sudden uncertainty. He eased free of Will's hold and put the book back into his hands, closing his fingers around it with firm insistence.
"Do as you please with this, Will."
Will cast a dubious look at him, shorter now without his shoes, but no less an honorable wolf without his mask.
"You can toss it into a fire or sink it into the river along with her, or find someone to translate it if you wish to do so,"
Hannibal urged, his smile small and strained.
If there is any person in the world who can redeem the Lady Murasaki, it is you."
Will swallowed hard, touched. He was even more touched when Hannibal added,
"I myself am an excellent example of your talents, am I not?"
"You are," Will said, moving to place the book on his vanity. He picked the tray up and carried it to the foot of his bed, where he settled it against the footboard before returning to his husband. When he began loosening his buttons, Hannibal smiled, the vestiges of his unease dissipating in the face of Will's gentle care, woes for another day that he did not wish to trouble him in this moment with his mate.
"Mind yourself, Lord Clarges,"
he murmured, getting a wolfish grin from Will. "I can always wake Berger," Will echoed back at him, stripping the thick, heavy military jacket from him and draping it over the back of his vanity chair. "But I prefer to pamper you myself, as you are terribly spoiled and far too used to it." Hannibal laughed at that, relieved to have the weight of the jacket off of him. "I'm going to wash up," Will said, leaving Hannibal to take his boots and stockings off on his own. "And then I'm going to get in that bed and eat until I'm ready to burst, and we are going to talk."
"About what?"
Hannibal asked, holding his balance gracefully on one foot to pull his other boot off. Will clicked the light on in the washroom, the gaslight blooming to show the tender anticipation on his beautiful face when he turned to say, "About everything." Hannibal smiled and did as his husband said. They washed up just enough to feel refreshed and lay on Will's bed with the tray at the foot, nibbling on the simple meal and amusing one another with stories of their night at the ball. Hannibal fed Will every now and then, and Will fed him in turn, blushing when his fingers were kissed with each offering. Eventually, their conversation returned to the subject of Murasaki, as Will intended. When Hannibal's eyes strayed to the vanity in the lacquered box there, Will curled against the pillows and took Hannibal's hand in his, idly tracing his fingers in the veins that lined the back of his hand. "Would you tell me about it?" he asked, murmuring it softly into the small space between them. "I know it must weigh on you." Hannibal said nothing, but his mouth twitched in a soft frown. "Bedelia showed me the portrait of your father," Will said, leaning over to put the lamp out, leaving them both in the dusky dark of pre-dawn. "You look very much like him."
"Do I?"
Hannibal asked, smiling at Will, but it was just tinged with sadness.
"I don't remember him very well. Just his voice, moments divorced from context. I thought it was because I was so young when he died, but it is odd that I cannot recall his face, as you mentioned. When I think of my childhood, I remember my sister, Misha, most clearly."
"It is truly a tragedy she was taken so young," Will said, folding Hannibal's fingers in his own in a soft squeeze. "When I went to Duxbury, I saw the stones."
Hannibal laughed, a short and wry sound. "My father's grand resting place?"
"Bedelia mentioned there was strife between them," Will admitted. He cut his eyes to his husband's, watching his response when he added, "She warned me that Lecter men have tempers."
"Heavens, yes, unfortunately,"
Hannibal said, chuckling at his cousin's meddling.
"Grandfather disowned him. Did she tell you that? All because of his concubine."
"Murasaki," Will murmured, thinking of the plain stone and how strange it was that she had been buried in the Lecter cemetery when she had never been a Lecter in name. He realized that Hannibal was staring at the jewelry box, frowning and grim, transported to an unhappy childhood with the mention of the name. "Bedelia said your family had been lost in an accident," Will said, feeling the pain of that moment like a hard place in Hannibal's heart, a wound that had scarred over without healing, and he was compelled to reach out. "That the river took them." Hannibal sighed and looked over at him, leaning his head towards Will's to rest there, almost touching.
"We fished in the very same river they died in. Rather, the split that goes around the capital. The first time Grandfather took me to Marsham Heath, I looked for debris from the wreckage. A child's hope to find some trace of them."
He fell still, reflective for a moment, once more a child scouring the river bank with a grim frenzy that had frightened his grandfather. "Bedelia told me you were leaving Hartford," Will said, the memory of her story firmly in his mind. "That there was a storm?"
"Yes, it was very early spring,"
Hannibal said, tugging against Will's hand, not to free his fingers, but to distract himself.
"Father had brought us to Hartford to see Grandfather, and they had a row. They're always arguing, he and grandfather."
"About your stepmother?" Will ventured, closing the gap to rest his forehead against Hannibal's, ignoring the twinge from the bruises that still ached on his ribs after a long night of activity.
"Yes, about her, about me. Grandfather wanted me to live with him. I wanted to live with him and to get away from Murasaki, but only if Misha would as well, and grandfather agreed. My father was incensed, and his concubine insisted we leave. She wouldn't hear of staying, no matter that it was night and dangerous. She goaded my father into heeding her, and we left."
Will absorbed that moment, his gift entirely freed to experience through Hannibal's memories what had happened, how it had felt, how it had pushed his nails into the fabric of his heart and torn a hole that could never be mended.
"The river had risen very suddenly throughout the day,"
Hannibal recalled, his voice softening as he was drawn back to that night.
"It crossed the bridge. Coachman couldn't see anything. He refused to go further and wanted to turn back. My father threw him off and took his place."
"That was a very dangerous thing to do," Will said, fiddling with Hannibal's fingers, the noise of his heartbeat becoming the rumble of thunder on that stormy, ominous night.
"It was stupid and foolish,"
Hannibal said, surprised by how harsh the words were coming out of him, surprised by the anger he still had all this time later.
"Stupid to have gone out on such a night, stupid to have tried to drive the coach in his drunken state, and stupid to have listened to her in the first place. Lightning struck a tree next to the lane and spooked the horses. He couldn't get them under control."
Will trembled, feeling his anger and the sour, heavy taste of despair. "It must have been frightening."
"It was absolutely terrifying,"
Hannibal breathed, his body shaking in a soft shudder.
"When I first arrived on the battlefield, the boom of cannons would take me back to that night. There is no sound that can quite encompass such fearful power as the crack of lightning. If the rain hadn't been so heavy, it would have burned the forest for miles around. The flame it lit was the only way I could see her face."
"Misha," Will said, a name on a tombstone. A child who, had she lived, would be a grown woman, older even than him.
"She was so afraid,"
Hannibal said, the ache in him sharpening as if such an honest recollection of that time allowed the wound to open, allowing all of those things he never let touch him come pouring out into Will's perceptive gift.
"She was sitting in her mother's lap. We rattled around like pebbles in the coach as it moved, and my father's shouting only made her more afraid. It was another crack of lightning. I could see her face. She was reaching for me. I can't recall if I reached back or not, or just wanted to. The horses went over the side, and the coach upended."
Will made a small distressed noise, fingers clenching on Hannibal's, imagining the sickening feeling of weightlessness that they must have felt, that split second of nothing before chaos overtook them.
"The coach hit the bridge and the stones at the riverside and fell sideways into the water. I never knew how my father died, but it was fast, I think. I hope. I like to think he died the second we hit. It was certainly a better death than the one he gave his concubine and daughter."
He closed his eyes to find the same darkness that had pervaded everything that night, Will's soft scent an anchor in the storm, keeping him tethered by the gentle hands on his.
"The shaft cracked in half on impact, and the broken end drove up through the seat when the coach struck the stones,"
Hannibal said, shuddering as lightning cracked in his memory, illuminating his sister and stepmother.
"It pierced them both, went straight through her and through Misha. One second my sister was alive, and the next she was gone."
"Hannibal, I'm so sorry."
"It was fast, at least,"
he said, retreating into distance, pulling the barrier of his control between him and that moment, trying not to let it touch him.
"I was relatively unharmed, but my father's concubine somehow lived. It was shock, I believe. She was dead. She just didn't know it yet. I remember the coach was filling with water, and she was looking at me. She never looked at me, not really, but she did then, sitting with her dead daughter in her lap, and that broken shaft jutting out of her, and water rushing up to cover her in freezing terror. Despite everything, I wanted to help her."
"Of course you did. Hannibal, you wanted to help her because you're a good man. You're a good man."
"I could not help her. I tried to, but she wouldn't have me. Even then she wouldn't have me. I got the coach door above me open and reached back for her. I dream of that moment sometimes, the way her eyes went wide, the way lightning flashed in them, as if her hatred of me filled her with strength. She screamed at me to get away. She swung her hand at me and found the strength somehow to scream.
Will fell silent, the details coalescing inside of him as they always did, taking the disparate pieces and fitting them together like a puzzle made of human emotion and motivation.
I pulled myself out of the coach, and before I could even get clear, the current dragged it free from where it had lodged and bore them away,
Hannibal said, taking a deep breath as the immediacy of that moment faded to less sharp memories.
I barely remember making my way back to Fernhill. I don't even recall why I chose to go there instead of to grandfather. Perhaps I feared he would find me responsible.
How could you have been responsible for such a terrible accident, Hannibal? Will asked, brows drawn together in concentration, his voice soft and gentle. You were a child, at the mercy of your father. If there is blame to be laid, lay it at the feet of temper, and take none for yourself.
I lay it at her feet, his lady Murasaki,
Hannibal said, her name dripping with disdain.
I'll never understand why she pitched such a fit about Misha living with me under grandfather's care. She played with Misha like a doll, but it wasn't as if either one of them ever paid us any true attention. She hated children. She particularly hated me.
Will took in the pain he saw there beneath the surface of Hannibal's frown, a lifetime of hatred based on rejection, on a child's interpretation of the world's uncaring rules. Why would she hate you, Hannibal? Will asked, hoping to get some clue as to what had gone so terribly wrong there.
She always hated me,
Hannibal answered, twining his fingers with Will's, eyes lowered in thought.
Her last act on this earth was to reject me.
Will thought of what he had said, drawing the details into his gift, imagining himself in that moment with the coach flooding with water, reaching for a woman who had no hope of living. It prompted him to ask, You said that the coach was wedged into the rocks? That the shaft had gone through her from the force? Hannibal nodded, his forehead rubbing lightly against Will's. Then she would have felt it when the coach was pulling free, Will mused, aware of Hannibal's sudden stillness. She would have known it was about to get swept away. Hannibal's breath came in short little bursts, a possibility before him he had never considered. I would never presume to know better than you in that regard, Hannibal, but perhaps she was not rejecting you, Will said, the gentle offering made with an understanding Hannibal lacked. You were a child, her feelings for you aside. Knowing she would not survive, perhaps she wanted you to save yourself.
Get away! Get away!
My father would have taken hold of me and drowned me with him, Will said, thinking of what might have happened had their situations been reversed. He would never abide my surviving if he should not. Hannibal turned slightly to look at him, the memory taking on new meaning, the widening of her eyes cast in a new light. The moment, perhaps, when she had felt the shaft give and knew what lay before her.
I had not considered it,
he said, realization softening his voice.
I had always felt she could not help but leave this world sure in the knowledge that I knew how much she despised me. Why should she ever worry for me after our life together?
People are complicated and difficult, Will said, feeling the shift and change in his mate as Hannibal considered this new information. If you think you know someone entirely, then you can be sure you hardly know them at all. We are complex and distressing creatures at our very best, and we are so rarely at our very best. Hannibal smiled at that and said,
It is a wonder to me that someone as young as you can have such a clear understanding of the human condition.
It is a wonder to me that someone of your age and vast experience can be surprised, Will said, relieved when his smile brought a widening of Hannibal's own. Thank you, Hannibal, for telling me of that night. It must have been very painful for you, and I must have seemed very prying to ask.
You are entitled to ask me anything you wish,
Hannibal said, his smile turning to a thoughtful quirk of his lips when he admitted,
And you have given me something to ponder, which I I've never thought to consider before. Makes the memory of what happened less painful to think it was, as you said, rather than how I recall it."
"I would never wish to dismiss what she has done to so profoundly harm you, Hannibal," Will said, searching his face. "I know too well how terrible the power is an adult holds over a child. Perception is tricky. I know my own recollection of my father's behavior is not as accurate as I could wish for."
"We are all of us unreliable narrators of our own lives,"
Hannibal said, his finger searching out Will's ear and jaw, a soft, brushing touch that settled him.
"We both have taken our blows and have the scars to show it. I hope the future holds far better for you than the past will, whatever you eventually decide."
Will said nothing, only leaned into him with a contemplative sigh as they both fell into reflective silence. Hannibal felt him grow heavier, and it seemed, when he blinked, that sunlight had inexplicably come to invade the room. Realizing he'd fallen into a doze, curled up with his husband, he eased from the bed and drew the drapes closed, throwing the room into near total darkness. He moved the tray to the hallway and returned to his sleeping mate, who lay comfortably against the pillows in deep, exhausted sleep. With silent, tender devotion, he divested Will of his crumpled pants, tossing them toward the wardrobe and admiring the muscular expanse of Will's legs in all their glory.
"Not the least bit of an unhappy prospect,"
Hannibal murmured, smiling when he thought of what had been said regarding Will's ability to strangle a man with his thighs. He hefted Will's half into his arms and tugged the covers down, pulling them free to ease him beneath. Will sighed in his sleep, and Hannibal bent down to kiss his forehead, shivering when Will's snub of a nose poked beneath his jaw, in an unconscious instinctive scenting. He smoothed Will's curls and tucked him in before retreating to his own dark room, already missing his mate's warmth and presence. It felt very lonely to be ensconced in his cold bed with the knowledge that Will was just a room away. But it was Will's choice. It would always be Will's choice to make, and his husband would let him know when he was ready, if ever. He rolled onto his side and nuzzled the garter ribbon tied around his wrist, finally drifting off to sleep with a slight, content smile. Afternoon found Will longing to be up and about. As comfortable and novel as it was to stay abed as late as he wanted, he was never one to be idle, and felt restless to have lost so much of the day to sleep. Jimmy came immediately when he rang for him, and Will found himself recounting the details of his night as he bathed, laughing and chatting with the valet, who had always been more friend than servant. "Has Hannibal risen?" Will asked, tugging at his cuffs and shrugging his shoulders to settle his jacket while Jimmy put his brush and comb away. Their masks hung from his vanity mirror, stag and wolf, placed there in a moment of whimsy by his valet and left in place at Will's insistence. He enjoyed looking at them, and returning to that night at the ball, he intended to do so as often as possible. "Yes, he's been up for some time," Jimmy said, and after a small hesitation said, "Beg your pardon, my lord, but can I ask what on earth this is?" Will turned to see Jimmy holding Murasaki's journal and peering at it with consternation. "I found it in the wardrobe. It was hidden in that jewelry box." "I wondered why that old thing was out here," Jimmy remarked, confusion still pinching his features. "Should I get rid of it?" "What is it?" "It belonged to Hannibal's stepmother, Jimmy," Will said, turning the book in his hands to open the back cover. "The Lady Murasaki." "Oh, my stars!" Jimmy breathed, eyes rounding in surprise. "It was in the jewelry box, you say?" "It has a false bottom. I think that is the only way it survived whatever purge the Duke requested of her things. I am glad the jewelry box itself is so beautiful, else who knows what might have happened to it and its hidden book." "This is remarkable, my lord," Jimmy said, closing the book with care. "Does his lordship know about this?" Will nodded and said, "He told me to do as I please with it." "Jimmy, would you know where I might inquire after a translator?" Jimmy was silent for a moment, a shadow of doubt flickering in his eyes. "I am not familiar with this language code, but I can make some inquiries," he offered, peering again at the writing within. "Do you mind if I take it with me?" "Please do. And if they need to keep it rather than translate it in my presence, just ensure that they take care of it and keep their name. I don't want it vanishing. Of course, whoever they are will need to be discreet." I'll take care of it, Jimmy said, his smile wide and beaming. It might take some time. Take however long you need. And thank you, Jimmy. Berger had made a run to the solicitor's office while they were sleeping, bless him, and Hannibal found a letter from Grandfather waiting for him, detailing that, in an odd change of circumstance, Matthew Brown had gone missing. Missing to the point that neither his father nor his sisters could say where, only that he had vanished without word to anyone.
The detectives are here and investigating, but this is a very unsettling situation, Hannibal. They questioned Peter so severely I had to intercede. He was brought to tears, poor lad, and was most insistent I relay to Will that Athena will soon have her puppies. I assured him I would do so and rely on you to pass the word on. Zeller has not yet returned with any news of Mason Verger's whereabouts, but when he does, I shall have him looking for Mr. Brown at once. As for the Lady Rathmore, she has been the picture of good behavior. She has called on everyone of note in Hartford and made herself abundantly available to the staff on all matters of running the household, which has left them all quite exhausted. Your Aunt Margaret joined us for dinner, and confided that she is vastly relieved our family can claim the more agreeable and pleasant sibling. She also warned me that she wished to speak to you, and soon, on a matter she refused to divulge. Forewarned is forearmed, my boy. On the subject of her husband, Lady Rathmore has spoken only 3 words when broached. I couldn't say. Mr. Stamets is making inquiries into the family situation for me, as that seemed fairly irregular. Take good care of our dear Will, Hannibal. I shall hold down the front here with Mr. Hawkes and Mrs. Henderson. Hopefully we shall have this matter dealt with to our satisfaction before my little gathering.
There was no closing sentiment. There never was with Grandfather's letters. They were neither of them sentimental in the end. The contents, however, were troublesome. Matthew Brown had no reason that Hannibal could discern to harm Will, considering how long they had known one another. But vanishing in such a way without word to his family was mightily suspicious, and he wrote back with every support of Grandfather's efforts in that direction, adding a reassuring note that he had settled his affairs at Galleyfield to everyone's benefit, and was keeping an eye on Francis in as much as he could, considering.
He is loose without direct supervision, only the attendance of Magistrate Crawford's men. I expect Lady Rathmore will be receiving a letter from him quite soon. Be alert to any change in her disposition. I don't altogether trust either one of them, despite Will's insistence that they will not act against him. If you learn anything further, please send word, or Zeller, or both, and I trust you to be well taken care of by the staff at Hartford. If Mason Verger shows his face on the property, instruct the staff to restrain him by any means and force necessary. I, too, am going to look into the Rathmore situation at Will's request. I expect by the time this reaches you, you will have been heartily amused by the contents of the gossip column. Take care of yourself, Grandfather. Remain ever vigilant.
He fully expected there to be a report for him when he returned to Marsham, detailing what Francis had been about. He wondered if Francis too would be waiting when they returned, and how he would react to being separated from Will under circumstances not of his own making. It brought a smug, thoroughly alpha smile to Hannibal's lips, and brightened his mood just to consider it, even if it was not something Will would approve of. Thoughts turning to his mate, Hannibal rang Berger and asked if Will was up yet.
Price just came out on a mission, my lord, so I imagine if he's leaving the house, then his lordship is up and about,
Berger said, fussing with Hannibal's jacket.
Fetch Will's coat, Berger, if you would,
Hannibal requested, drawing his own on.
I am taking my spouse out to see the city, if he's up for it.
Don't imagine there's much he ain't up for, my lord, Berger said with a chuckle, moving to do as he was told.
He's a fine and sassy mite, to be sure. Not a bit brawny, you'd say?
Hannibal called after him, as Berger went into Will's suite. After a moment he returned with Will's great coat in hand, and a puzzled frown on his face.
Brawny?
He asked, the frown deepening.
Not as such, my lord. Why do you ask?
No reason, Hannibal said, pleased and preening.
But remind me to give you a raise, Berger.
He took himself off downstairs, thinking it was likely Will would be in the parlour, and that was precisely where Hannibal found him, Once more his sombre and serious Will, who always seemed to carry a world's worth of weighty thoughts in the furrow of his brow.
"Ah, there you are. How are you feeling?"
Hannibal called, waiting in the doorway for Will to look up from his letter-writing and acknowledge him. "Certain that I dreamed last night," Will said, glancing up and seeing that his husband was dressed to go out. "Mina will never believe the contents of this letter."
"Speaking of letters, we've had one from grandfather,"
Hannibal said, fishing it from his waistcoat pocket to hand to Will, who read it with keen absorption. "Matthew Brown cannot be a part of this. He has had 6 years to do as he pleases, Hannibal. Why would he do something now and then vanish in such a suspicious way?"
"You feel that we are being given a distraction?"
Hannibal asked, relieved that Will could so easily give voice to his own doubts. "I believe we are being offered an alternative. At any rate, if and when Matthew is found, I want no action taken against him until I can speak to him. There is an explanation here, and I will not rest until I have it."
"The detectives are still investigating. Anything they find in way of evidence will be given to grandfather and to us. The truth will make itself known."
Will read the letter again, his tension fading to sympathy. "Poor Peter. I should not be so harsh with him. If there is a more gentle and caring man, I have yet to meet him."
"He will rally. He's always been much stronger than we know. Perhaps Athena will have her puppies, and he will have something pleasant to think of."
"Yes," Will said, his eyes growing distant as he considered what Hannibal had said. "It is strange, though. I have not seen Athena since your arrival. I hope she is well."
"Peter would tell you, were she not? But you could always write grandfather regarding it. Sure old Hawks can spare a footman to go check."
"I should. I will hurry and finish so that you may take these. That is, if you are going out."
"We are going out. If you would care to join me,"
Hannibal said, holding Will's great coat aloft in invitation.
"We can have lunch at the Grand, and I can show you the shops. I have some business to conduct on the Row, and there are things I think we should get you."
"Like what?" Will asked, finishing his letter rather abruptly and waving it to dry the ink. "I can think of nothing I need."
"I can think of 1,000 things without trying,"
Hannibal said, giving his mate an indulgent smile.
"But, namely, the calling cards we spoke of."
"Shall I wheedle you for something, Lord Clarges?" Will asked, snorting his opinion of that suggestion. He sealed his letters before standing to take his coat.
"Perhaps for trunks, if you would like to wheedle. Jimmy informs me you only have those 2 shabby things from your childhood,"
Hannibal teased, helping Will pull his coat on.
"And I believe I promised a wardrobe or 2 to a lovely courtier last night."
"Hannibal?"
"I must deliver or I might never see him again, and I cannot stand the thought of that."
"Keep it up and you may never see me again," Will said, his soft laugh trailing off when Hannibal's smile faltered. Seeing his uncertainty made Will wish he had chosen better words. Chastened, he said, "I apologize, I did not mean—"
"I know,"
Hannibal said, though he seemed strained and dampened by Will's statement.
"It is always yours to choose. I am a lucky man you do not choose lightly. Come, we have a city to see, and you have waited long enough to enjoy it."
Chelsea House was, as Hannibal had said, very nicely situated. It was only a short stroll away to reach the ruckus of the Row. Will watched the people as much as he looked at his surroundings, invigorated by the cold air and a good night's sleep. The buildings towered overhead far higher than even Hartford's highest turret, and the walkways were thronging with fashionable people in their finest, all looking quite pleased with being seen, even in the lingering fog. There were dress shops, haberdashers, jewelers, tobacconists, tea-houses, all manner of small bakeries and eateries, and no few hotels, all stretching down a massive, busy street filled with window shoppers, street performers, and merchants with small, movable stations, one of which got closed down by constables as they were passing it.
"This is Mr. Avery's sister store,"
Hannibal said, pointing at the massive building that housed a dozen individual businesses at least.
"And there is Gideon in Garnets, one of the finest jewelers in the country, though his sense of humor is quite sharp."
"There must be quite a lot of bleeding when the 2 of you are in company," Will absently said, missing Hannibal's wide grin. "Your office is here, is it not?"
2 streets over, near the residences. We can walk that direction. I shall need to make arrangements to refer my patients before long."
"Refer them? Will you no longer take patients?" Will asked, still looking around with wonder, his eyes snared by the glitter of jewels in the window at Gideon and Garnet's.
"If you decide to allow me to stay with you at Hartford."
Hannibal said, slowing to a stop so that Will could look his fill.
Then I was thinking of removing my practice to the country. There's no proper medical clinic for ours. I thought it might be of benefit to have a local hospital built in town, perhaps near your railroad.
Will blinked and pulled his gaze away from the display, replaying what Hannibal had just said.
You would wish to start a hospital in Hartford? Yes. I know several doctors who would jump at the opportunity to relocate out of the city, and there is need enough. With the rail coming and the lanes building up, thanks to you, we will be accessible there. Nothing huge and fancy at first, just small, with the potential to grow.
Will pondered it, turning back to the display to keep Hannibal from inspecting his expression too closely. You would give up your practice here to become a country doctor? Could that ever suit you, Hannibal? You seem at home here in the city.
I am. I've enjoyed the city immensely these past years, and I will not be entirely bereft of it. We shall come here for the season, as we must for me to do my duties on grandfather's behalf, but I am not particularly attached to the city as such.
You truly would make Hartford your home? There was uncertainty in that soft question. Uncertainty, disbelief, and a host of simmering doubts that almost completely hid the surprised pleasure that rode beneath it all. Hannibal caught his eye in the window, one reflection regarding another.
I would make it our home, Will, if that is what you choose.
Thoughtful silence followed that statement, along with the familiar wrinkle of Will's brow. But that is such a strange concept to me, Will said, shifting to look at him face to face. Hartford has always been yours, Hannibal, no matter what your grandfather says. I've never had a place to belong.
And now you do,
Hannibal said, amber eyes searching his face, flicking back and forth as if chasing the uncertainty away.
You belong with me, Will.
It brought a soft chuff of surprised laughter from him, embarrassed and disbelieving, but Hannibal was determined. However long it took, he would make Will believe it.
Shall we go in?
He murmured, willing to give his flustered mate an escape route. No, it's too excessive. It seems the height of vanity to even consider going inside, Will said, stepping back from the window.
Then it is fitting, as I am a creature entirely composed of vanity, Hannibal said, snagging his arm. Come along.
Hannibal. The protest was faint, token. Will was pulled from his refusal by his husband snagging his arm, and found himself entering a world full of sparkling, exquisite jewelry. How beautiful, he said, the words escaping him before he could still them. He was barely aware of Hannibal's hand on his elbow, guiding him within. He was so busy looking at the displays of meticulously crafted jewelry, eyes eagerly searching out the next beautiful creation, and then the next.
Indeed it is, and you must be Lord Clarges.
A bearded, somewhat amused-looking gentleman came toward them, dressed in the height of fashion, and impeccably turned out, even down to the winking stones of his many rings.
Gideon, Hannibal said, turning a little to add, you always have had an ear for information. This is Will, my spouse.
I know that, my lord, Gideon said, appraising Will as one might a precious stone. Oddly, it felt as impersonal as just that, and Will didn't mind it. He was more intrigued by Gideon's cat-like amusement and unusual inflection on his words. Everyone with eyes and ears knows that. You, Lord Clarges, are a perfect canvas. Excuse me, Will said, a startled laugh escaping him. Mr. Gideon, is it? I am no canvas, sir. I am not even sure why we are in here. If I had to guess, I'd say teacups and time, Gideon said, looking pleased with himself. Teacups and time? Will echoed, befuddled. He started when a trilling feminine voice called out, Lord Clarges, there you are! We have missed you so, haven't we? Haven't we? Yes, come in, please do come in. Will saw a spare, tall woman hastening through the shoppers and staff, a graceful bird of a woman decked out in jewel-toned red gown, hands fluttering like pale wings. She virtually beamed at Hannibal, and he wondered suddenly how much time his husband spent buying jewelry, and for whom.
Mrs. Garnet, lovely to see you as always. May I introduce my spouse?
Lord Clarges, she said to Will, including him in her smile. "What a lovely young person you are! How delighted I am to have you in our little store. We just received the most beautiful opals. I said to myself when I saw them, why Lord Clarges shall want these set at once as a gift for his stunning spouse. What better compliment to a beauty is there than beauty, my lords?" Will barely suppressed a smile at her pandering, but it was done without spite or malice, and Hannibal easily went along with it, insisting that Will be shown the stones at once.
"I must speak to Mr. Gideon, however,"
he said, depositing Will with Mrs. Garnet, when one of the jewellers began unveiling the opals in question, and said to Will,
"If you don't mind looking around in my absence."
"Take your time, you take your time. We'll do very well here, won't we, Lord Clarges?" Mrs. Garnet cooed, and Will just smiled, tolerating the attention and curious enough not to grow impatient with it.
"Come along, Lord Clarges,"
Gideon said, moving toward the back of the store where the work was done.
"Wouldn't want to keep you from your lovely husband for long, would we?"
Hannibal followed him, but always with Will in the periphery of his vision. A footman had accompanied them in case they needed to send any packages back to Chelsea House, and he too was vigilant to his surroundings.
"Well, well, didn't expect to see you here again so soon, Lord Clarges,"
Gideon said as he withdrew the package from beneath the counter, his smile faintly mocking as it always was. It was no secret that Gideon found the rich and powerful to be powerfully amusing and rich in flaws, but ultimately tiresome. It did not stop him, however, from taking their money, and then some.
"Considering it isn't birthday time. Have you taken a look?"
"Yes, I have," Gideon said, cocking his head to regard Hannibal.
"Quite a mess you've made, Lord Clarges." "You don't know the half of it, and don't start. Can you fix it?"
"My lord, Hephaestus, in all his wondrous power, could not fix it," Gideon said, never losing his slight smile.
"I can have a replica made—" "No, it must be the same one,"
Hannibal said, immediately waving away the suggestion.
"There must be some way to repair it."
Gideon frowned, his assessing eyes flicking from Hannibal to Will and back again. "There is a way, but it's a method we don't do ourselves. We would have to send it out."
"Then do so. It must be fixed. It must be made whole again."
"It will never be the same, my lord," Gideon said, brows rising at his vehemence. "It will never be functional."
"It doesn't need to be,"
Hannibal said, casting a look back at Will, who was staring down at the famed opals, the glimmering of the jewels no match for the sparkle of pure wonder in his wide eyes.
"It only needs to be whole again, and itself. That is all I ask."
Gideon absorbed that for a moment, and then his smile widened, and he said, "As you wish, Lord Clarges. Never say I'm a man to ignore the demands of love,
"You do so enjoy skating on very thin ice, Gideon,"
Hannibal said, frowning at him. Abel's smile grew sly at that. "There's a certain excitement in tempting fate, Lord Clarges. What can I say? If I might make a suggestion." Hannibal looked at him expectantly, waiting. "His Grace makes a commission once a year to have a pin made for a certain young someone I can only assume is your lovely Marquess. I believe that, my lord, is, in fact, a birthday, and one you might do well not to miss."
"Will's birthday? Of course, Gideon, I never thought I would owe you my life."
"Oh, I'd rather you just owe me the money, Lord Clarges," Abel said, amused. "He seems very serious for such a young man. Perhaps a pocket watch. He doesn't strike me as an Omega who fancies frippery and jewels."
"No, he has no patience for anything such, no matter how well it would suit him,"
Hannibal said, walking with him over to the counter where Abel drew out an assortment of watches. Hannibal looked them over, all the while watching Will, who was swept away from the jeweller by Mrs. Garnet to a display of the most God's-awful lavish collection of priceless jewels Hannibal had ever seen. He could imagine Will's reaction, stern and unimpressed, such wealth immaterial in his world where knowledge reigned supreme, and fishing was his single solitary pleasure.
"Gideon, do your smiths take commissions for tools?"
"What sort of tools?" came the bland response.
"Instruments used to make fishing lures,"
Hannibal said, and watched the wheels turning behind Abel's eyes, surprise, followed by amusement, and replaced by anticipation. "I'm sure they will, Lord Clarges," he said, smirking softly, "for the right price."
In which case, I know precisely what I would like to have made for my spouse for his birthday, and I want it in a particular case. I will write with the details and dimensions. I want the utmost care taken with it, and, if at all possible, I want the cup delivered to me along with it."
"And the pocket watches, my lord?" Abel asked, unable to contain his small smile.
"I'll take them,"
Hannibal said, waving absently at them.
"The lot of them. Have them delivered to the townhouse. Will may choose which he prefers, or keep them all. It makes no difference to me. Excuse me."
"Of course, my lord," Abel said, but Hannibal was already making his way over to Will, eager to get back to his mate. They went to the printer's to order Will's calling cards, which he chose quietly, with more interest in the process of printing them than in the design. The printer, utterly charmed and flustered to have a marquess be so familiar with him, gladly showed Will the process they used. Will was delighted by it, and Hannibal was delighted by him in turn. The cards he decided on were stark and straightforward, with an elegance that was eloquent of his nature, striking for their deceptive simplicity, and would be delivered by the end of the day, a flattering accommodation from an otherwise overbooked shop. That accomplished, Hannibal took his husband to tea in the Grand South Hotel, where Will became aware that they were drawing looks, and wondered at the cause.
"Is something the matter?"
Hannibal asked, seeing Will send another furtive flick of his blue eyes around the room. "I have the strangest feeling all afternoon that people are staring at me. It is unsettling."
"You're causing a stir,"
Hannibal said, smirking when he caught another hastily lifted hand and eyes cutting Will's direction. "I can't see why," Will said, his scowl severe but unable to detract in the least from his beauty.
"Gossip, most likely. I imagine those who attended the masquerade are very sought after just about now, what with their knowledge of such a handsome gentleman."
"Please," Will said, a soft snort of disdain accompanying the words. "As if they don't know everything there is to know about their handsome gentleman."
"I meant you,"
Hannibal said, thoroughly amused by the way Will's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing with annoyance.
"And they don't know everything about me. They don't know anything about me except what I allow them to believe."
"And what will you allow them to believe about me, Lord Clarges?" Will asked, angling a sideways look at him, admiring his fine features and the figure he cut.
"The truth? That you are the Marquess of Clarges, and my spouse, and that they should not agitate you."
"You reserve that right for yourself?" Will asked, chuckling softly at the way Hannibal grinned.
"Indeed,"
Hannibal said. In a light conversational tone, he asked,
"Did you not read the paper when you woke? That might answer your question as to why people are curious about you."
The waiter came to bring them dainty little cups of coffee, and Hannibal asked for the morning paper, which Will read with a furrowed brow, searching for what might be the source of society's sudden interest in him. Hannibal sipped his coffee, amused by the way Will's cheeks gradually darkened in a heated flush as he read. When he looked at Hannibal, there was impressive calm mingling with offended dignity in his furious blue eyes.
"Heavens, such agitation,"
Hannibal murmured, setting his cup securely in its saucer.
"And not the kind I prefer."
"I take it you've read what they have written?" Will asked, taking another look around the room to find people watching him anew. He took a nonchalant sip of his coffee, determined to ignore them all.
"Oh yes, I found it vastly entertaining."
"Entertaining!" Will echoed, and drew a deep breath. He folded the paper and put it to one side, movements careful and studied. "Please enlighten me, my lord, which part of this drivel is entertaining to you. The part where I am an expatriate spy sent to seduce the Ministry of War Council seats individually, or the part where I am apparently the latest conquest of the king's nephew?" Hannibal smirked and said,
"No, it was the part where you threw him over in my favor."
"Hannibal!" Will said, scandalized, but his anger giving way to amused disbelief. "I have no idea what this is about. It says we had a public tiff. I never—"
"Never? Perhaps you recall a certain ram?"
"A ram?" Will subsided for a moment, before ferocious irritation overtook him. In a tone so low Hannibal could barely hear him, Will said,
"I had forgotten all about that."
Hannibal, meanwhile, finished the paper from his side of the table, and opened it, reading aloud.
"Much to everyone's surprise, the much-loved royal nephew Bertram of Kirk, better known to the people as Prince Bert, was rebuffed by his mysterious wolf for the Marquess of Clarges, Hannibal Lecter, who claimed his prize at the end of the night by escaping with them in the ducal coach. We have it on good authority, however, Prince Bert's lover is none other than Lord Clarges' spouse, making their first public appearance under the watchful gaze of both husband and paramour. And perhaps such watchfulness is warranted with such a compelling beauty on the
He cut off when Will snatched the paper from him and folded it again before tucking it under the centerpiece.
I am extremely annoyed. That has not escaped my notice. The gossip column is always diverting.
Will glared at him, but it softened after a moment.
This doesn't bother you?
No, Hannibal said, returning to his coffee with brisk pleasure.
It certainly does not. I cannot allow gossip to bother me, nor should you. Bert is an old friend from medical school, and he is more encumbered by gossip than I have ever been, considering. He said you smacked him with a fan.
He deserved it, Will said, disapproval written in the firm curve of his mouth when he frowned. He was being altogether unbearable. He was on his way to a sound coshing at that, but I was too irritated by his persistence to be bothered with correcting his unseemly behavior.
Hannibal chuckled and said, He often is unbearable. He was very taken aback by his experience with you.
No more than I was with my experience with him. Had I known who he was, I would have been even more appalled by his terrible manners. I have difficulty believing he is your friend.
He is no longer my friend,
Hannibal said, feigning a sombre tone.
There's nothing to be done about it now. With the sort of gossip plaguing us, I shall have to call him out.
Honestly, Will sighed, exasperated into amusement by Hannibal's mock indignation.
He has impugned the honor of my mate. He's attempted to seduce you. He has commented on your thighs, spoke openly of admiring your figure as well as your neck. He has ogled you, and unforgivably so. Worse, he has been slapped with your fan,
Hannibal said, one brow cocking up over an amber eye.
Which is just unconscionable. I am the only one you should be slapping with your fan. I reserve the right to agitate you if you recall.
You're about to be slapped with this paper, Will warned him, his disgruntlement fading in the face of Hannibal's amusement. And then they can write about how I left you sitting here and ran back to Prince Bertram.
Goodness, what a scandal we shall make,
Hannibal teased, reaching out to bring Will's hand to his lips for a kiss.
Grandfather's going to laugh the rafters down. He will be absolutely delighted that you caused such commotion on your first day in the city.
Hannibal, in all seriousness, Will said, cocking his head to one side. Were you to lose the good opinion of others over something so ridiculous?
I couldn't give 3 figs for the good opinions of others, as you well know,
Hannibal said, smirking at Will when their eyes met.
I stand to inherit a title that has few rivals for importance in this country. I have money enough to ensure I never lose it. I have no reason to cater to popular opinion, Lord Clarges. Popular opinion must needs cater to me.
Arrogant ass, Will said, the words huffed with throaty laughter.
Have no worry on the subject of your affair with Bert, Will,
Hannibal told him, standing to offer his arm, which Will took with a wry smile.
Time will tell the true story of your association, and the rest is mere annoyance, which you shall have to become accustomed to if you decide not to toss me back like one of your fish.
Oh, trust me, Lord Clarges, it is tempting, Will said, the brilliant smile he gave to his husband enough to allay any worry such a statement might cause. But I am not one to give up so easily, if the catch is promising enough.
Then I shall do everything in my power to entice you,
Hannibal said, and kissed his hand with a smile.